Okay, welcome to part 2 of week 11, where we're now going to start to look at the elbow, work out some of the shapes there, starting with the front and the back, and then we'll kind of work our way down and into the meat of the forearm. All right, so first is first here. Let's try to turn down a little bit of the upper arm. That way it won't have to compete quite as much. And once we have that, then we're going to start to take a look at the basic shapes that live around the elbow, and we're still going to be able to maintain all of our basic ideas of three shapes per part. The only change is going to be that these parts get a little bit smaller, and because they're getting a little bit smaller, it can feel a little bit more challenging, and the perspectives get a little bit more challenging. So you just have to make sure you spend as much time as you need to get through the setup. Alright, so starting with the front, we're going to go to the front and then we'll jump to the back. The basic shapes that I'm going to use for the elbow are in part landmarks and then in part muscles. So there's nothing here that's like just shapes for muscle. The elbow, I use a combination of them. And from the front, we already have a good amount of them, so you're not going to have to do too much here. The medial epicondyle, or the funny bone, is a great reference shape, right? It's almost impossible to miss. We're all pretty familiar with it, so that's one of my elbow shapes. Two is this fossa that we've already talked about, which is the dive of the bicep down into the tail, into the radius. There's also another little muscle that makes that's going to sit down here, but we're going to count that as part of our forearm shapes. And then the third is going to be the ridge group, and that is a muscle. So what you could do now is just think about a big bridge that's going to go like this. And these are all things that live around the elbow. So the ridge group, or you think of bridge if that's easier, because it's the connecting bridge between upper and lower. It starts in between the tricep and the brachialis on the outside of the arm. So it's always going to be there here, and then it's a big egg shape. It's actually very large. It comes down here like this. It's part of what creates this wall, or that outside of the triangle there, down like this. And then it's always connecting to the thumb regardless of where the thumb is. So on this view, I'm going to take it from outside and I'm going to put it outside, or overlap, just like this. So in terms of the shape, it's just an egg or a bridge, but the egg in this view goes behind and behind. Now if you had this same view on the top, but the forearm pronated, so the thumb turned in, this would go that way, because it's always going to move to the thumb regardless of where the thumb is. So that's the challenging part of this one. I think throws people in terms of trying to get the forearms to look right, and it's largely a challenge of perspective, right? Because people have, I think, difficult time with the perspective in this area because they're not always doing the boxes and trying to see where things go in terms of planes. So those are your three shapes. We have the ridge group, which is part of your extensors. So in terms of the primitive, it's an egg. The placement outside of the humerus to the radius, and then to the carpus of the hand, the carpal tunnel. And its job in connecting those 2 points is to extend your wrist. So it's extending, it's raising your wrist. And then the parts is that there's 2 muscles there. And you don't have to always draw them, but you could think of them just by kind of dividing. Just going to put a line in here between them, or split that shape into 2. And you have in here 2 muscles, one called your radial brachialis. So remember, there's like brachialis up here. There's coracoid brachialis. Your bicep is bicep brachialis. Brachialis just means humerus. That's just Latin for humerus. So radial brachialis means radius to brachialis, means thumb side to humerus. So I think it's worth our time to look at that in a few views before we move on. Let's separate it. So let's have yellow. So this would be the radial brachialis. So it's going from top to bottom. And then the other is that you have extensor carpi radialis longus. So that just means it extends the carpal. So extensor carpi, which means carpal, radialis, and then long. So just, it's a longer muscle. It means there's always going to be a brief or a smaller one to support it. So this extends the carpal on your thumb side, the orange one, not the yellow one. So this one. Okay, and then a way that you can help kind of place these is find your long head. So here's the long head of the tricep. And if you bring that curve, just imagine it going across, that's about where these should begin. And that's also a nice way to maintain the flow, you know, going down from the arm here. And so it doesn't feel, you want to make sure you really avoid turd arms or like symmetry. So 1, ridge group, 2, fossa, 3, funny bone. Okay, so let's do it from the side. So same thing. This is the different view though. So the first one we just did, that was a supinated view. So what we'll do here is let's do the supinated view on this one. That way you have front and back of the same view, and then we'll pronate it. So here is outside of the humerus. Here's the thumb side. Now I'm going to look for a third of the way from the elbow, the third of the way up, or a third of the way up. If you have a hard time thinking about where to place it, look for the long head, across, create a bridge, and this is the forearm muscle. So here's your radial brachialis and extensor carpi radialis long. And then, so I'm just going to group them as one shape, if that's okay here. And I don't even think you need to worry about breaking these up, unless you have, you know, someone, maybe you're drawing a character that's really heroic, and like the Hulk, you know, Hulk would definitely have this, or you know, any type of superhero, because it's a show of strength. Great to have the arm, or any type of development with arms or chest, shoulders is always like a superhero-like character. And then if we start to work our way across, you're going to get to reuse some of the same elbow shapes that we talked about for the front. So we're reusing this one. We're going to reuse the funny bone. And now let's set up our landmarks back here. So remember when we talked about in the first part, I briefly mentioned in the example drawing, the ulnar furrow. Now that's a really good landmark to use for the back. So once I find the funny bone, the ulna, I'm going to make the ulnar furrow, which is the line of your ulna basically, and it goes like this and then down. And this is a good line to find because it's going to separate top from bottom of your forearm, which is separating extensors from flexors. Extensors top, flexors under. Extensors top of palm, flexors bottom of hand. And then the third shape, right? So why don't we just have the third shape here be the sphere of the ulna. So ridge group, ulna, funny bone. And then at this stage we're setting up that landmark for our carpal, for our ulna. So that's what that would look like here. What will happen to this now if we see it pronated and from the side? First, find the triangle between the brachialis in green and the tricep. That's where this muscle group starts. And instead of just going straight down, like it did on the other ones. Now it's going to weave. So it's going here, over the forearm, and to the thumb side. So anytime your forearm pronates or supinates, this muscle just tracks it. And this is a very different way of designing arms relative to some animals without pronation, right? Or animals that are stuck in pronation as a stance, like dogs. So you don't see this muscle track across on the outside than on the inside. It's very prevalent for us, chimps too. So the difference here is that this now has to move across the forearm. So that's a wrapping line now. So this is shooting to get down to the thumb side. So in this view, now we're going to see all of this, like the upper arm, brachialis goes behind. Bicep now is going to be overlapped because it's going to be put behind that. And then we could separate it. So just take a line, kind of slice it through the middle, and now here's a difference between the radial and the extensor. So do we have three shapes we can use here for the elbow on the outside? Sometimes you could see the ulna. We have our ridge group. So ulna and this one. Here, let's do the little break in the angle. Comes in and then down. And then there's a interesting muscle here that we could use on the side view for the 3 called your anaconeus, that you have to have as a kind of shape around the elbow. And it's a flat shape, so this isn't a muscle that's going to get a lot of mass to it. And if you would rather, you could use this for one of your 3 around the elbow. But it just looks like this, and it always fits right in that portion of the furrow that looks like it's broken or bent. And that's flat, and then it tucks underneath this to get to the elbow. So you could probably feel this on your own body or your own elbow, that there's like a depression, or it feels like there's a mass, and then there's a flat plane, and that's the anaconeus tucking under. And this is a stabilizer for your elbow. Maybe if you don't feel it, you could see on someone like the accent, the drop off of a large muscle like this, and then a flat surface that goes across the elbow. Maybe I could see that from a side view. So maybe we'd see it just a little bit here, and that could be one of the 3. You could use ulna, ridge, and anaconeus. But it's always most important to start with these because it sets up the landmarks for what the forearm is doing. But a lot of the extensors start under the ridge. So you want to get that to help avoid any type of unnecessary work. Like, why show the top of the muscle if you can hide it here? Also, if you can remember all the way back to the week on the legs, when we set up the idea that there's the sartorius, there's the iliotibial tract, and that sets up a plane where we just put muscles in the middle. It's pretty similar here. We have the ulna, we have the ridge group, and then muscles are just going to go in the middle. Okay, so technically your ridge is part of your extensors, which is all of the muscles responsible for opening your hand, right, or extending your fingers, elevating them. So let's do the remaining extensors. So this is the top of the palm, the top of the forearm, and we're going to start with these because there's more of them, and it's worth our time, I think, I'll design them for you. That way you can get a sense for what's there, and you don't have to draw all of these. I would only draw the primitive, which will just be an egg. But if you're a modeler and you're trying to spend a little bit more time developing your anatomical awareness, I'll show you the parts for these two. So primitive is an egg that fits right in there, right in between those two. Placement, these muscles attach under the ridge, or at the elbow, all kind of from up here, and then they attach down into either side of your carpal tunnel, in which case they would elevate your carpal tunnel, or a couple of them tied down into your fingers. And this is like if you lift your fingers and then look at the top of your hand, you'll see that there's all of these tendons that are pulling up, maybe making a shape as the skin is pulled. That's what is creating these. So the placement in terms of gesture is if you open your fingers, you'll feel the top of your forearm get stiff, or it'll get a little bit more compacted. And if you're making a fist, you'll feel these stretch. So step one, make a big ball that you can pinch and stretch, that you can just place. It never goes past the ulna, and it never goes farther than 2/3 of the forearm. So that's about my third. That's where I'm going to stop it. Here's my shape. Now if you drew the 2x4, like how we set up the idea for these in terms of perspective of the arm, this never leaves the top of that 2x4. So now I've got my basic shape. Now I'm just going to try to give it a better sense of space with these darker wrapping lines and overlaps. So this is where it lives. Okay. So the muscles we started with for radial brachialis, this one is extensor carpi long. And after you have a long, there's always a brief. And that's something, if you want to develop these more, you can start to see that all of the muscles in your forearm just go in an alternating way from big to small. So ridge group is big. I just did my long muscle. The brief, the extensor carpi radialis brevis, is going to be small. So that is tucked underneath that larger one, and then it starts to flow down into the carpal on this side. That's it. So if you're designing or rendering, again, this is another place to look for how ridiculous some anime and comics look, is just in the over design of the forearm. This shape should be small, the brief. So big, small. The next one is called your extensor digitorum. So this is an extensor for your digits, and it's a common extensor. So it fills up, it gets big again, in other words. So here's a big shape, kind of tucked up there, 2/3 of the way down, and then when it ends, it turns into kind of like a squid design. You have a common tendon that goes through the wrist. As soon as it gets through the wrist, then it spreads. This kind of flares, and this is what helps move or extend your fingers generally. So that's your extensor digitorum. So now that's a larger muscle. So what I'm trying to show in the rendering here is how the form of the forearm is created. Like look at all these little bumps now. Now look at comics and see how all of these kind of turn into like a big cannon, or like it's all of these lines and hatches, and you can just do a few. Just learn the ones that are there and just do those. You don't have to try to trick us. So I did the digitorum. Now after that there's a small one. So big, small, big. This is called your extensor digitorum mini. I'm going to draw it in pink just so you could see it because it's small. So it'd sit right here alongside the digitorum. This one only works your pinky. So that one would go down here. So try to remember this like it's called extensor digitorum mini-me, like the Austin Powers mini-me, if you've ever seen that old movie. And the Austin Powers character always would lift his pinky to his face or his mouth to look coy or whatever. And so that's the muscle that does it. The mini-me controls the pinky and helps the tiny Dr. Evil character look menacing when his pinky's to his mouth. So it does the same thing. So we have, and the other thing I'm trying to show you here is as I move, look how everyone is also going from high to low. Okay, so everything is getting progressively lower, and that's just rhythm. The very last one is extensor carpi ulnaris. So on this side, just as a reminder, the muscles here started from the ridge, and they all tied to either the radius or the carpal. And then as we get finally to the other side, now where we're thinking about the extensor carpi ulnaris, which is just this space that's left over. This is big again. This one does the same thing. It just now goes to the carpal. So this is really important because think about how you use your hand. You don't just grab things with your fingers. First, your wrist is put into a specific place that allows your hand and your fingers to grab onto something. But without something that stabilizes your wrist, you would just have to like throw your arm and kind of hope your fingers land on what you want. Right? So these are the muscles on the outside kind of function as cables to position the wrist in the area where it needs to be, and so your palm is positioned, and then the fingers can just pinch or stretch or up and close, open and close. And so that's it. Now, do you have to know all those? No, that's just stuff in case you're looking to deal with more advanced information. This would be all you could really need to use, and for that I mean homework too. So this could be 1, 2 could be what's under the forearm, which is your flexors. Now, if you could find the ulnar furrow, just make for this top view a big egg shape like this, like a big hanging shape. And as long as you've positioned this rhythm to be offset to the ridge, that's fine. That's all you need. Now, you can't see, I mean, even though there are divisions inside of your flexors, you won't see them. And that's because this is a fattier area. There's more flesh, there's more muscles, and it's because your grip is more important. You need more strength in your grip than you do in your extensors to open. The reason you see the extensors, however, is because they're closer to the skin, they're closer to the surface, so they make more of an impression. And that's it. So here's your completed forearm, and even more than that, your completed body. Right? So now you've done the entire thing. It's pretty weird. So if we're going to put this here, and I'm not going to make you sit through every single extensor divided, but we could just do it like this. So here's extensors, just the general group. So I'm going to tuck them under like this, 2/3 of the way down. And then if you think you see any flexors, they would be on the bottom here. So, but they always go behind the ulna. I have to show them on the underside of the arm. I'm leaving space here because you'd have muscles that go to your thumb from there. So in case you guys study the arm, I mean, sorry, the hand, I want you to have some space there from the end of your radius that you could fill in. And now if we look at the bottom of the arm, that pretty much gets us done. So there's a couple things here that are going to be worth looking at. The first would be you have a muscle called your pronator teres, and this is the muscle that pronates your arm, and that just goes right here. So if you can find your funny bone, just make an egg shape that fills in the other side of the triangle, left open, and under your ridge. So it just goes like this. So just draw an egg, and this is what pulls your radius over. So remember, the bicep supinates, the pronator teres pronates. So if you were to flex this, that would pull the thumb back over this way. So we could use for this underside, we could use for our 3, the ridge could be part of the elbow, 3, and part of the forearm, the pronator, 2, and then the majority of your forearm is the flexors. So let's give them like a purple. And you do not have to break these up. Are all of the same types of small threaded muscles there? Yes. Will you see them? Very unlikely. It had to be a really specific body type, like a super athlete or someone with very low body fat. I mean, if you make a fist though and try to pull your fist up towards your forearm, you'll see the tendons from these. Like you could see a little shape like this probably. Some people it's clearer than others. but for the most part, I don't ever worry about it. I don't break them up. I don't see a lot of need to. I think it's, for the most part, it tends to be more distracting than anything. And so this is kind of pushed up against the forearm muscles down in here. So let's just summarize this into a shape instead of having it broken up. So here's 3 eggs that you could use to find your forearm. So flexors, and if these were to flex, they would close your fist. They would tighten your fist. And then the extensors would have to relax. And then you'd have, again, like I said, that area for the thumb muscle would be here. And so that's it. That would be the 3 for the front, the 3 for the side, and then the 3 for the back. And I'll fill in this last color. That way we can have those clearly shown. And why don't we do just this one? That way I can give you at least one example of how this would look for perspective. Now we've done the upper arm. I have my radius here, and I know this is the top of the hand, so I'm going to make sure I have enough information to put at least a top plane. So what can I see? Well, I'm going to start with the ridge group because that's the hardest. Here's my triangle, so it goes from here. Now the thumb is here, so I'm going to pull it across. So it's this shape. And I'm going to use my darker lines just to make sure you could see clearly the overlaps. So here's the overlap as it comes out from between the brachialis and the tricep. And when it leaves, it's so in love with the thumb that it points to it wherever the thumb goes. So thumb goes here, and so it's going all the way down there. By the time it's about here, though, let's say halfway on the forearm, you're not really seeing much mass. So I'm kind of just drawing to show you where the tendons would go. There's probably enough of a turn here that I would see the extensors as a group. So let's put those in. And those might just look like this. And I would judge this by just looking at whatever I had left for the top of my box. So like there's a little bit there. So for this one, 1, 2, this is behind. And so then these are all now going down to the top. I want to end them in perspective. Here's my funny bone. So I kind of see the front. So my elbow shapes would be 1, 2. Now I'm going to see the pronator. Pronator teres is this. And that's pulling across and under. So it makes this little shape. And now I would see the flexors. So again, this is like I started out talking about process of elimination, finding stuff that's easier to find first and then working into the difficult things. So this is going under the box, by the way. There's never a more, or there's not a better example of the need for that than this area. And so this is a really challenging view here because you're seeing the pronated view, but it's kind of like 3/4. So that means I see almost all of the muscles. So maybe this is a good one to avoid for homework until you get a little bit more confident. But that would be the use of those shapes to show something that's more dimensional in terms of the view. So this is definitely a difficult week. Make sure you give yourself extra time to deal with the homework on these, and if you want some more examples or some help in working through these in your homework, I'm always around for Zoom meetings. I have been meeting with some of you, and I'm happy to continue to meet. Doesn't just have to be during our class time too. Just send me an email and let me know. All right, good luck.